David Siegel's a friend of mine. We worked together on the same team for a bunch of years, and he's written a terrific book called Decide and Conquer. And you're having great success with it, David. It's just amazing to see. And of course, you, like Steve Jobs, now have a new permanent uniform. It's a black t-shirt, only yours says Meetup on it. His did not say Apple, but that's the only departure from the
he didn't need to
Jobs
say
way
Apple.
of doing things.
He didn't need to say Apple. I think everyone knows Apple. Not everyone necessarily knows me. Everyone knows Steve Jobs, and certainly not that many people know David Siegel. So.
Well, soon. So what prompted you to write this book? And I really enjoyed it, by the way.
Ah, so glad. And you listened to it, right? Or did you read it? Oh, wow. Okay.
Most recently, I was listening.
Okay, wonderful. So there's,
you didn't do it in your voice because I know you so well. After I'm listening for a while, I heard your voice.
I love that. Well, I did pick out the voice. So that's something. I found someone enthusiastic. So I'm a pretty enthusiastic speaker, shall we say. So I actually remember reading your book when I was going to start working for 100 Flowers. And that was meaningful for me. And part of the reason why it was meaningful for me is because, we all know that we're going to be on this earth for a certain period of time. And there's a certain...
You just don't know how long that certain period is.
We never know. We have to live each day like it could be our last day.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a certain infiniteness to writing a book, that a book goes past you, just like your children kind of go past you. And it's something that can continue for 50 years, 100 years, 150 years. And that concept should always kind of really appeal to me. The ability to pass something down that my grandkids could read, or great-grandkids, to learn more about their great-grandfather. I always wanted to read a book like that was written by my great-grandfather or great-grandmother, learn more about them. The problem was I've read a lot of business books in my life, and some of them are so boring. They're just the same kind of concept that there's one thesis around it and just repeated through 300 pages. So I really wanted to write a book that was this kind of crazy story because storytelling, as you know, you're one of the best storytellers that I know, is one of the most powerful ways to help to teach and to educate. And I didn't have that amazing story. I had the ideas in my head around management and leadership, but I didn't have the crazy story. And then all I needed was Adam Newman. And fortunately, there came craziness from that experience of living under WeWork, being part of Meetup when you couldn't meet up in person, and all the trials and tribulations that we went through as part of the sale process. And afterwards, I almost felt like I needed therapy to kind of, handle how that crazy roller coaster ride happened. And that's why I wrote the book. Part of it was therapy. Again, we're fairly similar in certain ways. I tend to figure things out for myself, not by sitting in a room by myself and thinking, but in talking to people or expressing things in ways. And much like one is oftentimes told that a great way to build appreciation and happiness is to write a gratitude journal. Well, part of the book is almost journaling, and journaling is very helpful for someone. So for me, I kid you not, in 2 months, I just vomited out, maybe the author shouldn't say that, 75,000 words. Of course, we cleaned it up a lot later on, but it was incredibly cathartic for me, actually.
Now, I found, tell me if it was the case for you too, David, I found that in thinking about the book and in thinking about the stories I want to tell, it made me a better storyteller because it made me think in terms of the story, not just the kernel of it, but what's the beginning, what's the end, and what's the point of the story in the middle?
Yeah, what's the message? What are you really trying to teach people? Because it isn't about the story. Mm-hmm. It's about what can someone take away for themselves from the story? How could they potentially see themselves in that situation? And when you see yourself in a situation, there's a more higher likelihood that you could potentially then learn from it and then take some action afterwards. So, I'm a professor at Columbia, and I really believe in teaching through storytelling and communicating through storytelling. And again, I don't want to sound sycophantic or anything like that, but I really did, Jim, learn this from, working with you for the 4 to 5 years that I was at 100 Flowers.
And you told the story in the book about how we connected to that. It cost me a fortune because I lost your phone number.
Okay, can I tell the story to everyone?
Please do.
Oh, great. Okay, I was really hoping that I'd get a chance to do that, because to be able to tell the story of how I met one of my mentors to this audience is really, really special. So when I was at business school, I had kind of taken a step back and I thought, let's look at what everyone else is doing. Everyone's becoming an investment banker. Everyone's going in consulting at Wharton Business School. That's kind of what everyone did. My focus was, how do I find the right mentor? How do I find a person that I could learn from? Because my goal was to become a CEO one day. So I thought
And you wanted to be a chief of staff to a CEO.
Exactly. I said, I want to become a chief of staff to a CEO. And that way I could just learn as much as possible from that person. So I sent out hundreds of emails out to different CEOs to try to get an opportunity to talk to them. And gosh darn it, Jim McCann from the famous 1-800 Flowers commercials. And one of the reasons I reached out to you, Jim, was because I just love making people happy. And I wanted to devote my life to making people happy, making the world a better place. And that's what 1-800 Flowers does. So I wanted to work for a company like that. I reached out to you. You actually were willing to take the call, even though I just had no background practically at all, anything. And I called you up and I said, hey, I want to be your chief of staff, assistant to the CEO. And you're like, huh? Explain that again. What's the role? And I was like, I help with board decks and help you with presentations. And we had a lovely conversation. And, I thought that was the end of it. Fast forward, I take a job at a big pharmacy chain called Duane Reade. 3 years later, I see an ad posted on Wharton's alumni database. And the ad said, 1-800 Flowers looking for an assistant to the CEO. And I was like, whoa. So I sent an email to you and I said, Jim, if in any way I influence your decision to look for an assistant to the CEO, gosh darn it, that makes me so happy. I would love to, thank you in person. And then you wrote back 5 words. And the words were, I was looking for you. And it was just this Harry met Sally moment, right? And those 5 words changed the course of my life in many ways.
And indeed, had a heavy influence on 1-800 Flowers in our direction too. So thank you for that. You mentioned how in your book how you started working out of school in an HR function. How did that change how you think about things? You then go on to talk about when you're at Meetup, how you made a serious mistake that you weren't aware of at the time when you had to do a round of layoffs. And you said, that's it, there won't be any more layoffs, boom, we're done. And then something else happened.
Ooh, you go to the cliffhanger. So that's exactly right. So I started out in human resources, which is a very atypical field to go into, become a CEO. But
out of business school, especially.
Out of business school, especially. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, because I remember I was talking to Kevin Ryan at one point. He was the CEO of DoubleClick. And he said to me, David, you and me do kind of the same thing. We help to motivate employees. We help to recruit top talent. We help to build the right organizational structure to drive success. The only difference is I get to make those decisions, and in HR, you get to advise on those decisions. And I said, I want to be a decision maker, not just decision advisor. So the reality is that people build products. People make decisions. People come up with strategy. Everything is about the people. And your job as a CEO is to build the infrastructure and build the culture of a company, because so much is about company culture, a culture where you're willing to take risks and don't get penalized for taking risks, and all the other important elements of a company culture. If you do that effectively as a CEO, well, good things end up happening in terms of a company. And I think I learned that from my HR background. And the example that you gave, someone said to me, I read your book and I want to write about one of the worst things that you did in the book. Are you okay with that? And I said, well, that's why I wrote the book, so people can learn from all my mistakes.
Take your shot.
Take your shot. That's why I wrote it. He said, I want to talk about the time when you stood up in front of everyone after layoffs and you ultimately lied. And I said, I really want you to write about this, because the reason, so what happened is we unfortunately had to lay people off. I joined after only a couple of months. The company was losing $18 million. It was totally unsustainable, much like WeWork's business model at the time. And I knew that we couldn't be a successful company or move into the future unless we were capable from a financial perspective. So we had to make some changes. After the layoffs, I looked in people's eyes, and Jim, I just saw so much fear. and so much anxiety. And I just wanted to make people happier. And just wanted what I felt like do the right thing and have people feel less stressed out. So they said, someone raised their hand and they said, are we done? Are there going to be any more layoffs? And I said, there will be no more layoffs. We are absolutely done. What I should have said, of course, was my goal is for there not to be any more layoffs. Sometimes trying to be quote unquote overly nice is actually not nice.
Yep.
And the most important thing is to be kind, not nice. And sometimes it's not kind to say to someone, it's time for you to move on to a new role, or it's not kind to give critical feedback that could make someone feel like they failed or feel not good, but it's the kindest thing that you could do. And I didn't really understand the difference between them at the time.
I think you made that point several times in the book about being kind and giving further definition to that, David, in terms of what people would imply or interpret that to mean is you certainly don't ever lay anyone off. You certainly don't ever tell anyone this isn't the place for them. But you make the point here just now and several times in the book about being honest and direct and being doing the right thing for the company. There's oftentimes the right thing for the individual, even if it isn't apparent at the time. So there was a mentor of mine recently passed named Ed Miller, who used to run Chase. He was a president of Chase and Chemical Bank before that. And he taught Chris and I a valuable lesson, which was the most important thing you can do is if the person is in the right job, be honest with them, be direct with them, and tell them, here's your strengths, here's your weaknesses, here's why it's not the right spot for you. And say, I'm willing to help you with a reference, I'm willing to help you with introductions to get you into a place that is right for you, but this is not the right place. Have you had that exact circumstance in your business career now that you've had to have those conversations?
Oh, absolutely. I call them transparent separations. And when I was at Investopedia, there was an executive on my team who was really struggling, and he was unhappy. And he was actually bringing that unhappiness to all of his personal aspects of life. Because as you know, if you're happy at work, oftentimes you bring that wonderful positivity back home to your children and your family.
And vice versa.
And vice versa. If times are tough personally, then oftentimes when you get to work, it's hard for you to be your best self when you're working. And sometimes I'll say to someone, the best thing you could do to be amazing at work is take care of yourself first. Mm-hmm. And that's how you're gonna end up being better. So this person was struggling personally, struggling professionally, and I knew it wasn't the right place. And I sat down with him and I said, I think it's time for you to start looking for something else. I'm not going to let you go. You've given so much to this company and you care so much and I trust you so much, but you need to start looking for another role. And I will serve as a reference and I'll be honest in that reference about, your strengths and challenges. He ended up leaving the company and he has thanked me numerous times about giving him that time, because oftentimes the best time to look for another job is when you're already employed. And the key was
the hardest time is when you're not employed.
Exactly. And I wanted him to find that next job because I really cared about it. I've known him for many years and I've done that with dozens of employees.
Yeah, we both had that same experience. I'll still err on the side, but you have to be quick. When people violate the trust, you got to say it's surgical. It happens now. Sorry.
Yep, that's right.
Now, so back to, I love that term, transparent separation. So language matters, definitions matter, and that's one that's good to have in your pocket.
Yeah, that's why I wrote the book. So about 4 years ago, I wrote an article in Harvard Business Review about transparent separations, and it was published. And it was so exciting to me to be published. And I had numerous people reaching out to me about the article. And I even had people 2, 3, 4 years later reaching out and saying, I just read this article from HBR. Part of that was a reason for wanting to write a book, because you never know who's going to come across something later on. And it's really meaningful.
I'm finding more and more people, Worth magazine has a division, book publishing imprint, where they're helping people to write their books, CEOs, family heads, people who want to take the time to, you can't sit down with all of your employees and have hours and hours and hours of conversation to tell them the lessons you've learned and what you'd like to see. So what you're doing is a good thing. It'll serve you and your business and your brand and the people who you work with quite well. because now they can read your book and get to know you before they even meet you. But let's not leave the HR topic, because I think there's an important lesson you have for us here. And I'd like to just think out loud with you. But HR is the same name we used 10 years ago, 20 years ago that we use today. I think the HR challenge of today is so much more critical with all the ramifications from COVID, with the great resignation that we've heard it referred to, the labor shortages, pressures on wages, the remote work, do we work here, do we work here, safety of your people, career development when it seems like people are going to be more and more mobile. Talk to me about how you think about who you want as your HR partner in your organization. What skills do you look to them for? And how has that changed?
Oh, wow. Okay, it's great. So I think the other side of the argument is one can say the job of a CEO is possibly to be the chief human resources officer as well, and to look at themselves as that, not as chief revenue officer, but understanding that it all comes down to people. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have a CHRO or a chief people officer, but thinking about what is your real role is to optimize and motivate the people on your team to build this incredibly amazing company and culture. In terms of who I tend to hire, I would say the hardest job in any company that I am the CEO of is the head of human resources or head of people, hands down. And the reason for that is because, unlike many areas, I've never ran technology for a company. So the CTO knows deeply, infinitely more than I do about that discipline. And there's other areas that I've never run as well. And I just let them run through it. But I'm so passionate about making sure we treat employees in the right way, which doesn't mean give them everything they want. It means treating employees the right way that's best for them and for the company, that I tend to be pretty opinionated. So when you ask the question of who do you tend to hire, the answer is I need someone who is going to fight me and disagree with me and not be meek, but be as quote unquote aggressive as possible, because I have so many passions around it that if I have a partner who is just going to say yes to whatever suggestions that I have, it's not going to be optimal. I need someone who's going to have a very strong personality, and then ultimately smarter and better decisions get made when there's ultimately disagreement between people. So that's who I actually tend to look for.
Well, let's take one small aspect of the human capital management role. That is, you're bringing a new person into the organization. If you're working not 100% in the office, that seems to be more challenging than ever. How do you get them up to speed? How do you make them feel comfortable? How do you get them to be productive quickly? How do you get them integrated on the team? How do they get to know the breadth of the organization? What kinds of things are you doing in Meetup? What kinds of things aren't you doing that you might like to do in the future?
Okay, I love it. Okay, so yeah, it's ridiculous now. A lot of times an employee could have joined during the pandemic, left still during the pandemic, and the only relationship is getting a laptop switched out from their old company to get a new laptop from the new company. And that's their relationship. And that doesn't work. So what are the things that we do? So number one is we need to eat our own dog food. And what that means is we need to, just like at 1-800-Flowers, and I give this example all the time, that as an executive, I would deliver flowers on Mother's Day and Valentine's Day and work in the warehouses. We need to, if Meetup is all about building community, we need to build community at Meetup. So what do we do for that? So number one is we ask/tell every employee that they need to go to at least one Meetup event every month. And then we created a Slack channel where people are sharing their experiences of going to Meetup events, how that event happened to change their life and change their experience, much like when I would deliver flowers and I'd see the happiness that it actually brought to people. We need to be using our product to build community. So that's kind of one thing that we do within Meetup to really build that process. Now, when people are in person, we have something called, we have an all hands meeting, and some organizations do all hands meetings once a month, once a quarter. We have an all hands meeting every other week. Every other week, we have an all employee meeting. And the purpose
and now it's not in person, it's partially in person?
Actually, that's what we do. So every other meeting, we get the entire company to come together anywhere in the New York metro area to a hotel, because we actually don't have an office here. We're about to have an office finally next month. Get everyone to come together in person. And we do a hybrid event where some people are remote, and some people are in person, and then we offer free breakfast for everyone, and then free lunch for everyone, and then hangout time and community building time and relationship building time during that time. So even when people are remote during the pandemic, almost every month, except for when the pandemic was particularly acute,
Yep.
every month we had an in-person opportunity of someone getting together. Because if we're not prioritizing community and we're all about community, then we failed ourselves and we can't satisfy the needs of our organizers, our members, and certainly our employees. So that's something. We actually have something called, we're in person, called Treat Up, which we would get everyone together and have treats, and like 3 o'clock treat up time. And we'd also have something called Eat Up. It just changes the dynamics of kind of community when you're breaking bread together.
Absolutely,
And,
it does.
and it's so important. So just getting into the psychology of how people could feel connected. And oh, by the way, it's the right thing to do, but it's also the right thing to do in terms of retaining people. Because why is there the Great Resignation? The answer is a loss of community at work.
And you're in the community business. And when Scott founded the company back 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago now, it was with the idea of using technology to foster new kinds of connectivity and a connection / meetups. How is that changing, and how you changed the financial structure of the company, which was desperately needed. You took some big, bold risks there, but we'll come back to that. Let's talk about what it is you do. Tell me about Meetup, its impact on people. You and I share an interest in helping people socially. Maybe it strives from your shyness as a kid, my shyness as a kid. We both confess to that.
Absolutely.
And, one of the things I always stress with my kids who were shy themselves, I said, the best way to overcome shyness, you're at a cocktail party, go see someone who's standing alone and go introduce yourself to them because they're struggling. Always act as a host. If you're throwing a party at your home in Westchester, you're going to be going out of your way like a whirling dervish to make sure that people are having a good time, that they're involved in conversation, they're having a good time. And if you act like a host, you sometimes then forget that maybe you're a little uncomfortable too, because your job isn't to be uncomfortable, it's to make sure everyone else is comfortable. Talk to me about how Meetup helps people with shyness, with loneliness, all exaggerated by what we've gone through in the last 2 years. And just because you're in a crowd does not mean you're not lonely, because sometimes loneliness in a crowd is even more painful.
You could be in the biggest city in the world and be surrounded by people all the time and be the loneliest person out there. In a nutshell, Meetup's entire mission is to be the cure for the loneliness epidemic. 46% of people, not occasionally, not sometimes, but regularly feel lonely. 46%. And here's the crazy thing, among people who are Gen Zers, people in their early 20s, late teens, the number is 62%. Regularly feel lonely. And the younger the people are.
Of those, I've read that 22%, so nearly, let's call it a fifth, 1/5 of them, in their early 20s say they've never had a real friend.
I mean, it's just so painful. And, people like you and I have communal infrastructures that we've been able to tap into, whether it's church and synagogue, whether it's PTAs or other types of communal infrastructures. The world's changed. Robert Putnam, in his famous book, Bowling Alone, was one of the first to really shed a spotlight on the concept that many, many, many more people are bowling, but they're not bowling in leagues anymore. My grandparents were in a bowling league and they loved it. And actually I was in a bowling league, believe it or not, with my mom. We're in a bowling team, mother-son bowling league. And the epidemic is so real. I'll tell you a very brief story because we were talking about storytelling earlier. There's a meetup organizer, his name is Omar Acosta. And he was incredibly shy, like clinically shy and introverted. And he was spending 12 hours a day playing video games. And he was just absolutely depressed playing video games all day. And his brother said, hey, have you heard about something called Meetup? He's like, what's that? He somehow got the nerve to show up to his first Meetup event. It was very hard for him to do that. And it was a rock climbing event. He loved rock climbing before he started getting into video games. He then, by the time he went to his 6th event, the organizer left, moved to another city, and the organizer said, can you take over this group? This super introverted person. So we're talking about leadership before, and the advice that you give your son. or your children, excuse me. And he takes over the group. In the last 10 years, they have now had close to 1,000 events and 6 marriages. It's not a singles group, 6 marriages. He's told me he's on his way to his 6th wedding of people who met from this meetup group. And even though he's still an introvert, of course, he took on a leadership role and it's completely changed his life. He doesn't feel lonely anymore. There's another person I met, David Good. I couldn't believe this. He sent me a note, and his mother had just passed away. And he said, if not for Meetup, I wouldn't have been surrounded by all these friends during this very hard time. And it's not about Meetup, because Meetup isn't more special than anything else. It's simply about community and finding your community where you could be your authentic self, not your fake self, not the person that other people, your parents or whomever wants you to be, but your true self. That's what's really most important. The best things happen when you're able to share them with other people who share your passions.
Last week, I did something that I do once a year. I go up and spend an afternoon with the graduating second years in the Yale School of Management class put on by the fabulous Jeff Sonnenfeld, who's the Associate Dean at Yale School of Management. I was with 3 other people who were remarkable leaders. So the 3 people I presented with last week were Nigel Travis, a very accomplished CEO, last ran Dunkin' Donuts, Mickey Drexler, the merchant prince who created Gap and Old Navy, and didn't create it, but made it what it is. And then Helene Fox from CVS. And Helene is running for governor of Rhode Island now.
Oh.
And she's running for governor of Rhode Island because she had a 25-year successful career at CVS. And now she's back in Rhode Island and running for governor in the primaries there in September, I believe it is. Helene was a part of the team that decided that CVS should become CVS Health. And if it's going to be CVS Health, it had no business being in the business of selling tobacco products. She thought it was a moral time bomb. And so she was part of the team that recommended and implemented the elimination of $2 billion in revenue, which was highly profitable because it wasn't on mission for them. That takes incredible courage. It also takes a thick skin to deal with your investors, but it cements her moral foundation. And we speculated the other day that had she worked somewhere else, perhaps at the other large drugstore chain, she might not be able to run for Congress for governor as effectively as she is right now because of the moral creds she earned by making that tough decision at CVS, which of course is also headquartered right there in Providence, Rhode Island, or in the Providence area, where Helena spent all of that time. Tell me, where have you seen where there's moral consistency, where there isn't, where sometimes there isn't? Where have you seen the jeopardy in that?
Yeah, the biggest, first of all, amazing story. Thank you for sharing it. The biggest challenge is always around short-term revenue and short-term profit.
Yep.
And it takes a certain individual to really understand that even though you might be sacrificing a little short-term revenue in the example that you gave, or even if when we decided that there was a significant number of more extreme groups that were leaving Twitter and leaving Facebook and coming to Meetup because they thought that that could be a platform for building community, but their ideologies were extreme, and we would not and we turned them down, and we turned down really millions of potential dollars in revenue from these more extreme type groups. At the end of the day, you're building a culture for a company, and you're also building a culture around your ecosystem that you build. And it's better to forego that short-term revenue, because you'll find revenue another way. If you're a great company, you'll find revenue. And kudos to her for doing it. And ultimately, the number of stories that I've heard and that I've personally experienced around just doing the right thing, it matters. Because you know what? Employees see everything. They see everything. And the number of CEOs that delude themselves into thinking they could hide something from an employee, it's just, it's impossible. So the best thing you could do is therefore to be as transparent as possible. And more important to be transparent about the bad and the ugly than to be transparent about the good. Because the way that you really build trust is by sharing the bad and the ugly. So for example, when we had to have these layoffs, everyone, all the employees said, I didn't even know we were losing any money. I didn't know we weren't doing well as a company. I just heard we were doing great. So every month we open up our entire financials to the organization and anyone could see it. I'm on like 30, 40 different reports. And I tell every employee they could get any report in the company that they want to. And here are the list of all the reports that I get. Just sign up for the reports and you can get it. The more that people learn and the more that people know, the better decisions that they make. And then ultimately, a little bit of pain, but you get the benefit later on.
Let's solve another problem. Let me ask you to solve another problem. Attendance in church, participation in religion is declining and has been for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
How do we fix that? How do they fix it? I was born and raised Catholic. You were born and raised Jewish. You became actually more religious, I believe, than your parents as a result of a mitzvah you made to Israel as a young man. What is the challenge for religious leaders today? There are a few very successful, but most are struggling for participation. You're now hired to advise the world's religions on how to become more relevant in a very different time. How do churches become relevant by helping people with the issues that matter to them today?
Great. So I think people oftentimes get caught up in tactics and not in what the long-term goal actually is. And for most religions, the long-term goal is to bring people closer to God. And there's lots of different tactics that people can do, but that's a goal that many people that in our religion have. And the way in which people can feel a greater connection to spirituality is just different today than it used to be. Yes. So the big churches and the big temples and the big mosques, et cetera, where there's someone preaching to 1,000 people, that is not going to resonate for people, and small groups matter.
Has there been an intersection there?
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you go to a religious ceremony and it's 800 people, you're going to feel awfully lonely there if you don't know anyone else. And so it's actually exaggerating the problem. So where has inspired religious leaders used Meetup to help accomplish their goal of bringing people into community in order to bring them closer to God?
Beautiful. So we have many different religious leaders from all different religions. We'll have 8-person groups, 10-person groups, and they get together and talk about an interesting topic that may have been, gay, LGBTQ and religion. What does it mean? Yeah. Talk about those types of real topics that are on people's minds, but doing it in a safe, small, interactive kind of way. That's what actually works. So how will people get more attracted? They'll get attracted to religion. Why? Because they could be attracted to the people whom they're meeting in that religious discipline. The way to get attracted to the people that they're meeting is smaller group gatherings as opposed to these mega type opportunities.
All right, so get down and gritty here. She's a wonderful religious leader. She's in a nice community. She's got some decent little facilities. How does she form those groups? How does she get that first 10 people to come together for an interesting conversation? Okay,
so I'll give you the example of Lululemon. Lululemon succeeded as a company, take it out of religion for a second, because they built all these brand ambassadors.
It's not a religion?
You would think how much people love those, $200,
yoga pants.
They're yoga pants that it could be if people are willing to spend that kind of money, but it's a great product. It's a great product. So I don't want to say anything disparaging about the product certainly at all. But what they did is they built a brand ambassador program where they got every single, they gave these great yoga pants and etc. to yoga and Pilates instructors. And they built this ambassador program. And that means that each of them became leaders, just like we talked about earlier. So what could religious leaders do? What a religious leader can do is they could say, my job is to find other leaders to help those leaders to build smaller groups among them. Because I, as a person, can't do more than maybe 40 groups, 1 hour each, an entire week. But I can find an army of 100, 200, 300 people who could each potentially have small group gatherings in their homes or in libraries or in Starbucks offices, Starbucks, wherever it is. And I'll create the potential curriculum or conversations that people could have, and they can then decide what they want to do. So I think, the old school way of calling it is like a train the trainer thing, but I think building people who could then lead others and the community of leaders, to me, is the path. That's what I would suggest. In my very, very, very humble.
So in practical terms, this pastor has this nice little church there. He or she should be working with you to say, hey, I have the space. Why don't you come bring your meetup meeting here?
Absolutely. Any pastor could do that. And we are always looking for spaces and venues for where you could host a meetup event. And then, people's then association with going to a church or doing something at a church can be that much more powerful.
Sure.
And it breaks down barriers, because for so many people, their experiences in religion were not positive experiences, unfortunately, as kids. And then they take it to adults and they don't necessarily want that same thing for their kids. So how do you create those positive experiences? Do positive things within, those venues and those confines. So
next topic we wanted to touch on was your relationship with that crazy founder that you respect so much, Scott Heiferman. And in the book, you talk about how you needed to give some separation. You wanted the best of Scott, but you needed to take the reins of the place yourself. So you talked about how you changed out some people. You asked Scott to take a leave, but then Scott wrote a beautiful letter to his team, asking them to trust you and to turn to you as the new leader, but he would still be there as a founder and be back and active as a founder. But first they needed to invest in you.
Yeah, the founder is the heart and soul of a company. And it doesn't matter whether that founder has left the company 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or whatever time ago. The DNA of the founder and the DNA of the company, as you know, Jim, better than anyone, are just inextricably linked. We have our 20th anniversary celebration on June 14th of this year, and very shortly. And the only two people who are going to be speaking are myself as a CEO, and before me is our founder, Scott Heiferman. And he deserves that. And Meetup deserves that, because the founder is so deeply important. The founder keeps the company's moral compass. That's what I've always believed. It's very easy for a number two person to come in and focus, like we said earlier, on revenue and on profit. And as a publicly traded company, there's tremendous pressure to be focused on those things. And there should be. You should focus on those things. And those are really important. But how do you make sure that we never lose our moral compass? It's continuing to keep the founder abreast of everything happening within an organization. But at the same time, a new leader can't lead if the founder, who has 16, 18 years of experience in the company, is there at all times. You need that mental space for a period of time to figure out how you want to build and how you want to build the right imprint, on a company and build the right strategy for a company. So that's why we had that kind of 3-month break until he came back. And then what he would do, one of the things he did is he took people on meetup crawls, and he would groups of people to go from meetup event to meetup event to meetup event, which is something that he took me on prior to my joining. And it was powerful and it was motivational and it was just really special. So it's incredibly important to stay connected to the founder and to find the ways in which the founder can continue to help a company.
It's amazing how international Meetup is. Did you have Meetup activities in Russia?
Ooh, good question. We had many Meetup activities in Russia, actually, and in the Ukraine. In fact, people are using Meetup today in the Ukraine and in Poland for people who are displaced out of the Ukraine to build community in Poland and Romania and Bulgaria and other countries that so many individuals are now refugees of. So this is a very controversial topic, and I'm happy to share my opinion on it. Wimbledon just announced they're going to have any Russian or Belarusian athletes, and I was talking to my wife about that. And there are companies that are divesting out of Russia. My personal belief is that if one of the goals is to help people to be there and support people, and people in Russia need support, the average person in Russia is likely going through a lot of pain, a lot more pain than the average American's going through. That's for sure. I'm not going to compare pain of Russians, Ukrainians, etc. There's a lot of pain all around, tremendous amounts of pain, but we are definitely not leaving Russia. And if people in Russia continue to use Meetup to help them to live happy and healthier lives, then I want people to live as happy and healthier lives as possible.
So I can't go without asking an expert. Finally, here, ask an expert on leadership and an excellent leader to talk about another T-shirt wearing leader, and that is President Zelensky. Your observations on him, his leadership style, his unlikely path to where he is now. Tell me what we're saying about President Zelensky.
It just tells you that leaders can come from such a wide array, political leaders, of places that you never would have thought of. It makes me think of Harry Truman, who was a relatively unsuccessful, business person who ended up being one of really the top presidents in terms of, if you really learn about some of the things that he did, really extraordinary decisions that he made. So in terms of the head of...
Before you leave Truman, at the last day of the White House, he refused to take a pension.
Wow.
He and Bess got in their car and drove home to Missouri. No Air Force One, no pension. He said, "It was a privilege for me to serve at a very difficult time." So go back to your stories about leadership and what we'll be saying about President Zelensky.
Yeah, I think we will look at him, and hopefully he lives for many, many, many years, as probably one of the greatest leaders of the early 21st century. I would go and say that, and I'll tell you why. What Churchill's genius was, and I had the fortune of going to the UK and going to the Churchill Museum, which is extraordinary for anyone who has not been there. It's a fantastic museum. What Churchill's genius was, he was obviously an incredible decision maker, but he was also better than anyone else in knowing how to use the technology, the PR technology at the time, which was the radio, in helping to reduce people's fears, and helping to give people confidence and understand the psychology behind what people really needed during a terrifying time period in everyone's lives, in people's lives, World War II. Zelensky understands how to use PR, how to use communications in powerful ways. When I see, a picture of him in an army suit and holding a rifle and being there with soldiers. Now, is he doing that, most of his time? Of course he's not. But the fact that he decided, I'm going to spend some of my time doing that, and I'm going to share with others what's really important in fighting for my country, that's important. The other thing is he is bold. The book we talk about, being bold. He is willing to call out world leaders, the president of the United States, world leaders, and tell them they are not doing enough. He's not sycophant. He's not worried about upsetting people. He is saying, I am here to do everything that I possibly can to support the needs of my people. And talk about, I don't know what his approval rating is, but I am sure it's higher than,
I don't want to be the one running around taking a poll.
I would not want that role either, but he really is extraordinary. And I think every leader can and should learn from him.
Well, I think everyone can and everyone should as well. I think it's important for us to point out to young people today, I'm doing it with my kids and my grandkids, watch this man. This is a lesson for the ages in terms of, as you say, being conscious of what the media availability is to you, how your voice, your demeanor, the green T-shirt you wear, the fact that you are bold, as you've encouraged so much in your book, Decide and Conquer. All of it matters. How you appear, your tone of speech, the vocabulary you pick, everything is important to leading people, 40 million people, in a time of the most amazing challenge and peril that they could ever face. And here they are doing remarkable things as a result of remarkable leadership.
You're talking about David and Goliath, and the amount of just incredible belief that they can survive, they can fight off Russia, and the success so far, and God willing, hopefully to continue. I hope and pray that it will continue, and his leadership is an enormous part of that.
Well, I'm gonna rescind my comment that was the last thing we talked about, because I have one more question for you. What's the current count on number of countries visited? I asked that because David, in his youth, decided to try and visit as many countries as he could, and he has a couple of other buddies he's done this with. Tell us the current count.
So my general goal is I always need to have more countries than my age, because although I might live to over 100, I'm probably not going to. So I always have to be one country more than my age. So since I'm 47 years old, I have 48 countries right now. So I'm getting close. So before my next birthday in about 7 months, I need to make sure I hit another country. I gotta go somewhere. Gotta go somewhere new. So I'm always one country ahead at least.
David, your book, Decide and Conquer, was a treat to read and to listen to. I encourage everyone to do just that. Decide and Conquer. You have 44 lessons that you've learned so far. And I suspect there's a second edition possible because, as we can tell from our discussion today, you're still a learner. And that's a terrific thing, because when you are 104 and you're going to your 105th country, there'll still be opportunities to learn, and you live that great. I'm so fond of the years that we had to work together. So proud of what you accomplished for us. So proud of what you've accomplished since us, what you've done with Meetup. I can't wait for the next chapter in your life, never mind in your book. But I'm proud to be your friend and admirer of you and all you've accomplished. And thank you for bringing these 44 wonderful lessons to the community that has this important interest in everything you have to talk about.
A lot of it happened because of your mentorship, and I really do mean it. And I thank you sincerely.
You're just being kind.
I'm being truthful.
Thanks, buddy.